welcome to Movers and Shakers on JTV, the Global Jewish channel. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Karen Pollock, MBE. Karen's the CEO of the Holocaust Educational Trust, and we're also joined by Marla Tribich, who herself is a Holocaust survivor. So we're very delighted and grateful to have you both here. So Karen, can I start by asking the work of the Holocaust Educational Trust? What is it that you do? Can you just...
Sure. So the Holocaust Educational Trust is a charity, and our aim is very clear. We want as many people as possible to know what happened during the Holocaust, where it happened and why it happened. And we do it for two main reasons. One, for those that were murdered and for the survivors that are still with us, like Marla, but the other because there are lessons to learn from it. So we teach in schools across the country. We reach thousands of young people through training teachers so that they can teach appropriately in the classroom. We organise for Holocaust survivors to travel far and wide giving their testimony, and we're very indebted to people like Marla, because really you can hear a pin drop in perhaps the most disruptive of classrooms when they hear from Marla. We organise for young people to visit Auschwitz. We receive government funding to take two 16, 17-year-olds from every school in the country to see the horror of the camps themselves. And then we also have a huge community of young ambassadors who we want to empower and educate to be advocates for protecting the memory of the Holocaust, but also standing up against injustice today. So that's us in a nutshell.
And I think there's so many things to pick apart from what you do. I mean, you just have so much impact on the youth generations. And Marla, you go into schools and you speak about your story, and why is it important to, and what's the role of educating the future generations? Because you are a survivor yourself, but as we know, survivors aren't going to be around forever.
Well, there are many reasons, but just starting with the schools, it isn't only schools I go to. Actually, now there's the demand for the parents who apparently when the children go home after having heard a survivor, they want to discuss it with their parents. And the parents don't know anything about it because they didn't have it on their curriculum. They didn't learn about it. So some of the schools have actually organized the parents to have a parents' evening with a survivor, and then the next day to speak to the classroom. I go to schools where, you know, they have a whole day of the Holocaust, and they create all sorts of art and poetry, and they really get involved. And I am amazed by the young people who really want to know. They are my inspiration to carry on doing it because of the interest.
And do you tell your stories? How do you engage the youth? And do you start by telling them your stories? What's your process?
Well, they're obviously prepared by it's usually a history lesson. It starts as history. But history is, generally speaking, so far removed from that. This particular history is so far removed that it's just in history books. And then when they have the opportunity to actually see someone who was there, it makes all the difference. It makes it alive. And if I may quote one of the students I spoke to, well, not one particular school, and I get a lot of feedback. And this student, a sixth former, who had been to Auschwitz, he had visited Auschwitz, and he wrote to me and said he could not get round his head 6 million. All the hair that's seen there, the shoes, the whole atmosphere, it still didn't get to him until he heard a survivor. Just hearing one story, one personal story, makes all the difference. And he said something very important, very significant, and that was that, I won't say everything, but one quote, he said, "It is very important that something is done so that the Holocaust is never forgotten, because if we forget, they will have got away with it." And that is so true, isn't it?
And I think, I mean, there are a couple of things. I think the first thing is we see ourselves the way that young people are touched by meeting a survivor and understanding the human story. And when we take young people to visit Auschwitz, it's all about the individuals, because a lot of 16, 17-year-olds, when they go, that was often the age of the survivors they've met before they've come, and they suddenly realise this person's arrived at a camp, they've lost all of their family either in the gas chambers or even before they even got to Auschwitz, and had to suffer months and months of terrible, terrible suffering, and then survived miraculously. You know, a lot of survivors say by luck. They come to London or to England, they rebuild their lives, and they meet people like Marla and just can't get over how positive and, you know, the strength in these people's characters, despite everything they've been through.
And you talk about, it's the personal stories. People are touched and want to hear the stories of the survivors, but yet, as you said, 6 million Jews perished in the Holocaust, and we still have Holocaust deniers. We still have people that are saying that the Holocaust didn't happen. How, Karen and Marla, when you're talking in schools and educating and at the Holocaust Educational Trust, how do we deal with these people?
Look, I mean, Holocaust denial can come from a number of sources. It can come from ignorance, it can come from hatred, and it can come from people with a pure political agenda, which in my opinion is anti-Semitism. It's a hatred of Jews. And it's important to know where it's coming from. The way to fight ignorance and hatred is to educate. So our job of reaching hundreds of thousands of young people per year is one way to tackle it. Another is, if you're taking, which we are, 3,000 young people per year to visit Auschwitz and actually witness where it happened, to see the gas chambers, to see the clothes, the hair, the shoes, all of that, they become witnesses. They are the witnesses for those that were murdered. And they can say, you know, they can stand up to those deniers and say, you know, you're talking rubbish, because I've seen it with my own eyes. The sad truth is, we are going to come to a time when we don't have the eyewitnesses with us, whether it's the liberators or the survivors, and we're going to rely on the next generation to be upholding the truth of the Holocaust. And denial comes from all, you know, sides of the spectrum. And it's our job to protect the integrity and the truth of the Holocaust. You often find Holocaust language and imagery used to fulfill political agendas. And it's up to us to say it's not appropriate and this is why.
And touching on the political agendas, of course, you're taking thousands of school children every year to Auschwitz and to concentration camps, but you've also taken some politicians, some MPs. How do you feel, because there's been such an uproar about supposed anti-Semitism in politics, in some of the different political parties at the moment, do you feel that when they go, they see differently? Does it affect how they legislate?
So a couple of things on that. I think the first is, the Lessons from Auschwitz project is government funded, and we very much encourage members of parliament to come with their constituents, their students, on the visit. And we generate a huge amount of regional press, which is really important because most people are picking up their local newspaper and seeing what's going on. And so we're just reaching even more people. I think the majority of MPs that join us, however much you've read in a book, we say seeing is believing. It's once you're there that you really understand, you begin to understand the magnitude of what the Holocaust was. And I think generally, but not always, most public figures come back and understand the danger of using the Holocaust and Holocaust language to make perhaps other political points. Some do it lazily, some do it deliberately, but I think once you've been, you understand why it really is a standalone subject and period in our history in its own right. But look, we're all aware of anti-Semitism today, whether it's incidents that we're aware of young people, you know, on their way to school, or whether it's in public and political discourse. And it's our challenge to just keep on educating, I think, and reaching as many people as possible, but also saying saying no, it's not on, and this is why.
And if I'm right in thinking it was Gordon Brown that introduced the initiative to take the school children, is that?
Not exactly. So it was our initiative, which we were taking 500 students per year. And Gordon Brown was then Chancellor and became aware of the project and asked, what can we do to make this a bigger, more nationwide project? And it was absolutely with his support and, you know, the government of Tony Blair that, you know, committed the initial funding, but we've been really fortunate that that's been continued by then, you know, governments since, so coalition governments and the current Conservative government.
So I was going to say, actually, you've seen that the funding has continued. Do you see differences between how the Labour and Conservative governments deal with and fund? And also, looking forward to the future, just say Jeremy Corbyn became Prime Minister, do you think that you'd have the same funding that you have now?
It's interesting. I think the one thing you find in the House of Parliament where people from all political parties can agree and come together, it's that Holocaust education and commemoration is important. And actually we have a real, you know, a huge swell of support that is cross-party. I'm not going to start speculating about what might happen in the future. Every time there's a new government, we have to be able to prove the worth in what we do. But it's pretty clear, because you meet our young ambassadors, and you've met lots of them, they're so energized and enthusiastic about protecting the memory of the Holocaust and playing a part as a citizen in their lives today and in society, that the evidence speaks for itself.
I want to touch on the young ambassadors in a moment,
Sure.
But Marla, what messages are the most important for you to hand over to people when you're speaking to them and being so inspiring? Because people really listen, and I mean, I'm just in awe just sitting here, because you've been through so much and people really listen. What are the most important messages that you portray?
It just, after listening to my story, because they ask many questions, and that gives me a lead to tell them why I speak. They often wonder, you know, is it difficult for you to speak? Or how do you feel about speaking? And I always say it is difficult. It's emotionally very draining. So one could ask, well, so why do I do it? Well, I do it because I believe it is so important. Because, as Karen said, they can learn lessons. But one of the important things is to see what can happen when society breaks down and a despot rules, and there's so much prejudice and discrimination. And I point out to them that it is important that they don't remain silent. Whenever they see any injustice, that they speak out, and that they just don't turn away from it. And I do think that they take it on board quite seriously. I mean, there's so much to these, you know, the actual talk and the creates so much discussion among the children, and it's the next day and the day after, and I get this feedback about how they have been inspired, and not only a lot of human points, like sometimes when I finish speaking I get a question like, so how did you survive? And I feel like saying, well, I've just told you the whole story. You tell me, how do you think I survived? But I don't do that, obviously. But they just can't get over that it was possible to survive in those circumstances. And they do explore it, and they do dig deeper, and they do want to know. And so, as I said before, in a way, they're an inspiration to me. Sometimes these questions are very simple, like one little girl came up to me and said, were you very close to your mother? And obviously this is something that affected her, losing her mother.
What do you think about...
It brings out a lot in the children.
What do you think about, because you're saying that the children are really inspired and they find it so interesting and they want to ask hundreds of questions, but then we've also got people that are talking about Holocaust fatigue, as we were talking about earlier. What do you think about the issue of fatigue?
It is very interesting because there is a section, very, very small section, and I haven't come across it lately, actually, certain people do feel some fatigue, but really I have no answer to it. I just feel like saying, okay, you know, we're not relying on you to remember, but sometimes I try to get through to them how important it is to remember. Because there are people who died, and it's not only one family, it was their own, the extended family, their neighbors, their friends, their relatives, and there's nobody left in the world to remember them. And if we don't remember, well, they'll be forgotten forever. And we know that in the Jewish religion, actually, remembrance is very important. And we all remember our dear ones. We do have the yard site and the, you know, Remembrance Day. But there are some people where there's nobody to remember them. And I feel it's our duty to do it.
And something else just to mention is the Holocaust is on the national curriculum. So most schools teach it to 13, 14-year-old students. And it's the question of, well, how much time is spent on teaching the Holocaust and what quality of resources are the teachers using? And that's where we come in, because we try and provide them. But I think what you find is that there is a generation of, I'd say, the younger generation who not only want to learn about it, and there was some research done not so long ago that demonstrated a high proportion of young students wanted to learn about the Holocaust. So I think I don't think there is a general fatigue, but there is undoubtedly, I mean, if not every day, most days you will find some story in a newspaper about a link to the Holocaust or Nazis. It's quite incredible. But actually, I mean, only last week there was a discovery that a mug that was part of the relics in Auschwitz had a seal that, when you lifted it up, actually had hidden jewellery that an inmate had hidden there from however long ago. So stories are still unravelling about the subject, and then that becomes obviously newsworthy. So I think the suggestion that there's fatigue is, it's how are we talking about it? And you know, one of the dangers is you can't go from saying it's important to learn about the Holocaust to simply just remembering it. You have to understand and know what it is to be able to then commemorate. And that's what we try to do with the help of incredible people like Marla.
And as we were talking about earlier, we were saying about student ambassadors. So some of the students that you have taken to the concentration camps have been Muslim. They've worn hijabs, and subsequently they've become ambassadors for the Holocaust Educational Trust, which is incredible. Do you think that this is kind of paving the way for Muslim Jewish relations and how people can better understand each other?
The Holocaust Educational Trust isn't specifically a Jewish charity. We were founded by a Jewish and non-Jewish former members of Parliament, and we very much, our team are majority not Jewish, and the people we would reach are majority not Jewish. Our work is about reaching every young person across the country, and that means you have a very diverse group of people, which surely is what this country is made up of and what we're all proud to be part of. Whether it's a step in terms of interfaith, I think it's more about people learn to understand others when they understand their history and their culture. And of the ambassadors that we've managed to empower, some of them, for instance, have come to Israel with us and visited Yad Vashem. There was, for instance, one young Muslim girl who wanted to go and then visit the mosque. She had the most spiritual and incredible experience and felt she understood more about both faiths and cultures. I think anything, when you understand about the Holocaust, if you can't take away from that the notion of difference and prejudice and the notion of learning to understand each other so that you get along and would defend each other, I mean, I don't know what else you can take away from it.
Well, actually, one of the things that I haven't pointed out, because it's normal, but there's a very large proportion of Muslim students in some of the schools I go to. And they're extremely interested, and they ask the most incredible questions. So, as you are saying, I totally agree with you that the more we know about one another, the better. And I'd suggest they ought to learn about Jews, because you say, why is there so much anti-Semitism? What is it about us? But most people who don't even know Jews,
often a survivor going into a school is often the first Jewish person they have met. You know, the Jewish people are a minority in Britain, so many schools, and I think a lot of, I mean, certainly a lot of the young people I see, I mean, they're in awe of meeting somebody Jewish. They can't quite believe it. And but it sort of demonstrates that point of the more interaction, of course, makes a difference. But just sort of going back, I mean, of course, it's an incredible sort of byproduct to celebrate if, as a result of learning about the Holocaust, that leads to a better, sort of more together world and society. But, you know, our job is quite specific. It's about learning about the history of the Holocaust, understanding who the perpetrators were, who the victims were, all of the victims in the different groups, but also understanding about those people who didn't stand by, or those people who collaborated, and raising the questions about your role in society. But, you know, we're quite clear on what we're trying to achieve, but there are all sorts of wonderful things that, as a result, I think we can celebrate too.
Well, unfortunately, I think we've run out of time, but thank you so much for coming to JTV today, because I'm sure everyone is going to be so interested in what you've both got to say. And thank you, Marla. Thank you, Karen. And please join in again for the next segment of Movers and Shakers on JTV.